All right, so this year it's actually going to be Super Bowl 60. So Super Bowl 60, man, that's 60 Super Bowls that we have been a part of. Not me personally, but in general, America. And so, I think it's time that we stroll through and recap every Super Bowl, all 59 of them, obviously, because we don't know the result of 60. As we go on this journey and figure out, how the game has changed and definitely what has been done to certain teams and, what hasn't. So, yeah, I mean, without further ado, let's start with Super Bowls 1 through 10. Super Bowl 1, the first ever Super Bowl, was played in 1967, and we're looking at the Super Bowl starting in the Los Angeles Coliseum between the Green Bay Packers and the Kansas City Chiefs. Yeah, I mean, this was the start of not only just Super Bowls and the American tradition of Super Bowl Sundays, but it was also going to be the start of what would eventually be the merger of the AFL and the NFL. Of course, that wouldn't start right away, but this was our first AFL NFL matchup here. Um, and I'm gonna tell you something right now. This game could definitely be named a different trophy name if Vince Lombardi did not win this. I really strongly believe that, if there was a cowboy by the name of Tom Landry that won, could have been the Tom Landry Trophy, man, at this point. But it's not. It is the Vince Lombardi Trophy for a reason, and it's gonna stay that way. Um, Overall, I mean, a huge thing is the amount of Hall of Famers that have been in the Super Bowl. I mean, it's a lot to say, but looking at some, I mean, Len Dawson, Bart Starr, Jim Taylor, Buck Buchanan, Bobby Bell, Ray Nitschke, Jerry Kramer, Forrest Gregg, Vince Lombardi, of course, the head coach of the Chiefs, Hank Stram. I mean, I can go on and on. There's just a lot to name, and not enough time, but this was a lot of Hall of Famers in the future for this game, and overall coming into the game, Kansas City they were 11-2 and 1 in the regular season. They were able to dominate the AFL and be able to go into the AFL championship game and dominate the Buffalo Bills 31-7. For the Green Bay side, they definitely have had their success. Vince Lombardi was already winning trophies and championships, but this was the Super Bowl. This was the first big thing here. And they dominated the NFL with their defense, relentless, perfectionist of a coach, and they took care of Dallas. And honestly, that was definitely a very close game. That again, that could have been a Tom Landry Cowboy type Super Bowl for the first one. So again, that was very, very important. So overall, it wasn't as entertaining as people probably thought it would be, and I think it was kind of a see the NFL is just better than the AFL, and it was that kind of game, man. Green Bay won 35-10. They won the first ever Super Bowl. Super Bowl MVP went to Bart Starr. I think that was a huge thing for his legacy, and of course, he would go on to be a Hall of Famer. But I think having him with a Super Bowl MVP and a world championship under his belt, that really did cement that. And also cemented Vince Lombardi as arguably one of the best coaches at the time in history. Still, arguably. But, there's some guys that are there that you could say is up there with him. But yeah, Super Bowl one. The start of something really, really, really um, magical and start of a tradition that to this day everyone gets super excited for. No matter if you love football or you hate football or you don't really care, you always will know there is a game and it's called the Super Bowl. Next up is Super Bowl 2, man. So obviously after Super Bowl 1 came Super Bowl 2 with the same NFL team and the Green Bay Packers. They actually closed this out with a 9-4-1 record, and they played a new AFL opponent this time, the Oakland Raiders. who had a 13-1 record. Now, looking at this game before anything, Green Bay had back-to-back losses to close the season. They definitely were aging. They definitely were an aging football team. Vince Lombardi was definitely on his way out, but they were able to survive that really, really frigid ice bowl against the Dallas Cowboys, and that really did save Vince Lombardi's, I feel like, legacy. And also, it definitely gave Tom Landry more of a more ambition for him to obviously achieve further success. The Oakland side of the ball, I mean, they dominated the entire league, and they also dominated Houston to get to the Super Bowl. They beat the Oilers, the then Oilers, 40-7. So they were, high hopes of probably beating this team, and a lot of people thought Green Bay, we'll see, it might be a hard fought game. It was not. Green Bay ended up beating Oakland 33-14. Yeah, it was just experience that just was able to outmatch that really, really high powered Oakland team. A lot of Hall of Famers, man. Super Bowl MVP. How about Bart Starr? Once again, Hall of Fame wise, they had people, again, Bart Starr, Forrest Gregg, Kramer, Willie Davis, Ray Nitschke, Herb Adderley, Willie Wood, Fred Biletnikoff, Jim Otto, Gene Upshaw, Willie Brown, obviously Coach Lombardi, as well as Al Davis. So there's a lot of Hall of Famers. I can go on and on with this. Obviously, another Super Bowl with a bunch of Hall of Famers in it. Keynotes, honestly, for this. They played in the Orange Bowl this time in Miami, Florida. But the main keys are Starr was the first ever to win back-to-back Super Bowl MVPs. Green Bay was the first back-to-back Super Bowl champion, and Vince Lombardi was able to retire on top. So again, definitely great notes. Super Bowl. I'm not saying I watched it all, but or even at all, just mostly a little bit of some NFL films in it, but definitely had the feel of kind of a just a sloppy game in terms of one-sided. So overall, though, Super Bowl two, man, that's where we're at with that. On to Super Bowl three between the New York Jets and the Baltimore Colts. This is definitely one of the most important Super Bowls in the history of the league because of the way that what transpired was the merger. So Super Bowl three played in on the Orange Bowl in Miami, and it was against the Jets, who was 11-3. They had an offensive firepower. They were led by Cool and Broadway Joe, which everyone in New York wanted to be with Joe, whether you were a male or female. I mean, he was the guy. He was the celebrity. He was a celebrity crush, absolutely. And he was going to go up against, well, one of the dominant NFL teams of that year and of one of the eras, and that was the Baltimore Colts. They were actually 13-1. They had a dominant, dominant defense. Everything about them was dominant, and so dominated everything in the NFL. Dominated Cleveland 34-0 in the championship game, and this to me, well, for the world at the time, they're like, yeah, this is a guarantee. NFL is just better than the AFL. This is before the merger, and they thought, this is a easy win. Now, what happened? First of all, before we get into it, Hall of Fame wise, there's Hall of Famers like Joe Namath, uh, but you also got Johnny Unitas in there. You got the famous coordinator of the Colts, Chuck Noll. You got Don Shula, Weeb Eubank, the Jets coach, John Mackey, and Don Maynard. Those were the Hall of Fame guys in that Super Bowl. Um, and let me tell you something, man. This was the first David Goliath Super Bowl matchup in the history of this game, and Jets were a huge underdog, right? Joe Namath guaranteed a victory against his team, which was very bold of him, especially going into the game being, knowing that he's going to go up against one of, and at that time, the best defense in the game. But they won. They beat the Colts 16-7. Shocked everybody. It shocked the United. It shocked the Colts, and yeah, I mean, it shocked the world, dude. Joe Namath's prediction came true, and this was huge because it showed that the AFL can win the big one. It can win the Super Bowl, which again trickled down to, well, it looks like we should merge these teams and these leagues, and that would definitely come to fruition in the year 1970. Um, the Super Bowl, this Super Bowl actually, it was named the Super Bowl after this game. So this was a huge thing for them. And finally, there was a name to it. So, but Super Bowl three had some magic, man, and definitely, honestly, from the score and from what it looked like, it was a defensive battle, and it wasn't all amazing and entertaining offensively, but the Jets got it done, and it really changed the NFL. Also, for Jets fans, this is the only time that you win the Super Bowl. So, you know, will that time come ever? I don't know. But at least you got a Super Bowl ring with it. Super Bowl three. Super Bowl four was definitely extremely important. It was the last game, last Super Bowl game, last game in general before they merged both AFL and NFL to just create a National Football League. So, this was the start of new beginnings, And, you look at these two teams from Minnesota, they were 12-2. They averaged 9.5 points a game on defense, which obviously is absurd, man. And they would eventually, with that D line, be called the Purple People Eaters. So, there was a lot of hype behind that team. They definitely went back and forth to beat the LA Rams. It definitely was not easy, but they got it done. But they demolished Cleveland to reach the Super Bowl and, claim their place in the NFL history there for their first time in a Super Bowl. For the Kansas City Chiefs, they've been there. They went to Super Bowl one. They lost to Lombardi and the Packers. And so for Kansas City, it was a step to go back. They finished 11-3. They did not even win a division title at all. They did put up 25.6 points per game that year, and they gave up 12.6. So really good. Um, Definitely against the Jets, they were in a dogfight to the end. They did end up beating them, but they definitely controlled Oakland, which obviously is their arch rivals. They controlled them extremely well to reach the Super Bowl. So this Super Bowl was taking place in New Orleans, Tulane Stadium, and well, the finishing is Kansas City 23 and Minnesota 7. It was not even entertaining, but it was extremely important in terms of which Hall of Famers were in it and the importance of the game. So, Hall of Fame wise, I mean, you're looking at a lot of them: Alan Page, Carl Eller, Paul Krause, Mick Tingelhoff, Ron Yeri, Hank Stram, Lamar Hunt, Bobby Bell, Willie Lanier, um, Len Dawson, on and on, right? So with this game, besides it being the last game before the official merger, first of all, the AFL won again, second straight year winning it. So they really did show the NFL, hey man, we're equal to you. Second thing, this was huge for Hank Stram's legacy. This was huge for Len Dawson's legacy. They already lost the Super Bowl. They definitely did not plan on trying to lose another one. And I mean, at on paper, it should have been a really close game. I mean, this is a defensive minded type game. It ended up being just Kansas City controlling this entire game. So, but for Minnesota, it was their first time. So a lot of people, didn't really. It wasn't like, oh well, they keep making and they keep losing. Obviously, they would definitely be back. But for the Chiefs, this was definitely their their one-time victory for a long time. And again, this was huge for Hank, for even Lamar Hunt, which the AFC Championship trophy is named after. So again, a lot of legacies on the line. Definitely important Super Bowl to say nonetheless. And Super Bowl MVP, Len Dawson. So this was Super Bowl four. It really wasn't as entertaining, I think, as people probably wanted it to be back then. But yeah, Super Bowl four, man. Super Bowl five took place in Miami, specifically the Orange Bowl, and this was the game between the Dallas Cowboys and the Baltimore Colts. This was definitely a game that was sloppy, and it was all over the place. In the end, it was actually a field goal that won the game. So at 13-16, that was the final score. Baltimore Colts winning. Looking at the two teams, the Dallas Cowboys came in, finishing the season at 10-4. They were the NFC East champs. It was already merged, so you know they were part of the NFC as the Colts were now part of the AFC. The Dallas Cowboys had a top 10 offense and defense, um, and to be super interesting here, they actually beat the Detroit Lions 5-0 to go to the Super Bowl, which is crazy. Um, or in the divisional, they shut down the Niners in terms of the second half, beating them 17-10 to reach the Super Bowl. But that 5-0 win is definitely a weird one, weird score there. The Baltimore Colts were 11-2-1. They were the AFC East winner. They were also the best team in the AFC. They had a top 10 offense and defense as well. They definitely shut down Cincy, and they beat Oakland to reach the Super Bowl. When you're looking at the Hall of Fame players, you got Johnny Unitas, you got Gino Marchetti, you got Jim Mackey, you got Staubach, you got Tony Dorsett, you got Rayfield Wright, you got Bob Lilly, you got Randy White, you got Cliff Harris, um, Tom Landry, obviously. Don Shula was a part of, or not even a part of this, but I apologize. But Don Shula, was that ex Colt coach. Uh, didn't reach the pinnacle of what he wanted to do in Baltimore. But yeah, this came down to the wire. It was a sloppy Super Bowl, nonetheless. 11 turnovers, disgusting. Um, it was actually the first Super Bowl on artificial turf, and the Super Bowl MVP was the first and only time that this has happened in the history of it. Was going to the losing team. Linebacker Chuck Howley won the award. For both these teams, for the Cowboys, this was just a great start to them trying to get in the door of the Super Bowl, actually making it. For Tom Landry, this was huge for him to try to make it as well. And for the Colts, I mean, they lost Super Bowl three, heavy favorites, and lost in a David Goliath battle. So this was very important. Um, but they redeemed it. Could they have lost this game? Absolutely. They both did not play great. Let's be real. This was sloppy all around. But the Colts, they were able to pull it out, you know, last second field goal. And just like that, man, already five Super Bowls in. Super Bowl six was back in New Orleans at once again Tulane Stadium. And it was between the Dallas Cowboys and the Miami Dolphins. For Dallas, they were 11-3. They were first in offense and they were seventh in defense. They beat Minnesota and dominated the Niners to reach the Super Bowl. This was definitely Dallas's time to shine. This was a team that obviously went to a Super Bowl, lost that to the Colts. Prior to that, lost to Green Bay in some fantastic battles, specifically looking at the Ice Bowl. And so, for a lot of people, they really did question, hey, can Tom Landry win the big one? And is Roger Staubach really going to lead this team to the promised land? On the other side, you had the Miami Dolphins, who were 10-3-1. They were fourth in offense, and they were third in defense. They had a hard fought battle against Kansas City to get to the championship game, and they shut out the Colts 21-0 for the Baltimore Colts' chance of going back to the Super Bowl and replaying the Dallas Baltimore Super Bowl of last season. So, in this game, Hall of Famers, of course, Staubach, Landry, Bob Lilly, Herb Adderley, which you might have definitely heard from his Super Bowl winning team in Green Bay Packers. Well, he came to Dallas. Mel Renfro, Chuck Howley, Mike Ditka, which you will definitely hear from him later. On the other side, I mean, you had Bob Greasy, you had Larry Zonka, you had Don Shula as the head coach. And so this was definitely going to be a interesting Super Bowl, right? And it was actually a cold Super Bowl at 39 degrees Fahrenheit. So, for a southern state, that was cold. And definitely one of the coldest ones, if not the coldest Super Bowl. So, with that said, Dallas did win 24-3. 24 points, man. Only gave Miami 3 points, which is insane. But yeah, this was huge for Tom Landry, for Roger Staubach, and of course for the Dallas Cowboys, man, because they could win. And, obviously the jokes will continue later on, but as of right now, in this era, the Dallas Cowboys were on top of the mountain, and they were finally Super Bowl champs. Super Bowl 7 would be played back at the LA Coliseum, where honestly, this was honestly a boring Super Bowl from the scoreline in general, the game. I probably would have fallen asleep if I was alive, man. This was a really boring one, right? But it had a lot of implications and definitely a lot of history making. So overall, Super Bowl 7, Miami was 14-0. By this time, they were 16-0 heading to the Super Bowl. They were first in offense and they were first in defense. They squeaked past Cleveland and they fought against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh definitely could have been in it, but Don Shula's team rose above that and reached the Super Bowl. On the other side, the Washington Redskins at the time were 11-3. They were seventh in offense. They were third in defense. They beat up their opponents in the playoffs, which was past champs Green Bay and the defending champs, the Dallas Cowboys. So you got Miami, who's back at the Super Bowl again after getting getting stomped on last year, and then the Washington team that obviously was making their first ever appearance. So, with that said, why was the Super Bowl boring? Well, because the score was 14-7, and I believe that the last time they scored was in the second quarter. So it was pretty boring, man. Um, Obviously, they had a lot of Hall of Famers: Greasy, Zonka, Warfield, Langer, Shula, Hamburger, Jurgensen, head coach George Allen. Yeah, there's a lot of people. At the end of this, the Miami Dolphins won, and the Super Bowl MVP of this was safety Jake Scott, who played a tremendous game. Now, the key takeaways of this as well: the Miami Dolphins ended 17-0, the only perfect season, the entirety of the season, perfect in NFL history, and it still stands today. And will it ever be done? I don't know. There was a team that was almost able to do it, but almost isn't good enough. But Miami has definitely written the record books for this as being the only perfect team. But Don Shula, this was huge for him. We all know he was not winning. He didn't win a Super Bowl until this point, and you know There are, again, questions of can he win the big one? Well, he did. And in the end, the Miami Dolphins just became one of the most dangerous teams in the league. Not just because of their record, not just because perfection, but because they were definitely planning on being back. Super Bowl 8 was played in a new stadium in Houston at Rice Stadium. Super Bowl 8 was extremely important in terms of the fact that these two teams obviously didn't meet, but they've been in the Super Bowl. There was no first timers here. One team just got off a Super Bowl and they were looking for back to back for the first time since Green Bay. And one team was trying to win it after they lost. They lost to the Chiefs. So, you know, it was going to be a really good game. And obviously, a lot of people thought it was going to be a very, very close game. So, when looking at it, Minnesota went 12-2, ninth in offense, second in defense. They still had that stout purple people eater defense there. They fought with the Washington Redskins in the fourth quarter. And they were able to pull that out. And then they dominated Dallas to get to the Super Bowl. For the Miami Dolphins, they went 12-2. Not perfect this year, but it was okay because they were fifth in offense and they had the best defense in football. They handled Cincinnati and they dismantled the Oakland Raiders to get to where they were right now. At the end of it, it was a lot for Minnesota to handle. Obviously, with the Hall of Famers like Zonka, Greasy, Jim Langer, Alan Page, Carl Eller, Tingelhoff, Fran Tarkenton, Paul Krause. There was a lot of great names out there, great legends. This was the first artificial AstroTurf game played, and this also was going to be the back-to-back season that the Miami Dolphins was dreaming of. They beat the Minnesota Vikings 24-7, beat them down. They are the first back-to-back team since Green Bay did it in Super Bowl 1 and 2. It cemented Don Shula as a winning coach, and obviously probably gave that Hall of Fame resume a lock for sure. And for the Vikings, this was just another tough loss for them. They had a great defense, they had a great team. They just came in there and they weren't ready. And it is unfortunate because they definitely have had some tremendous teams. But this was not the team that was going to win it on Sunday. And Miami, once again, was on top. Super Bowl 9 was in New Orleans at the Tulane Stadium. And this was played with the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Minnesota Vikings. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, this was their first time in the Super Bowl. They got close before and they lost. Specifically the one in against the Miami Dolphins, which they definitely think they should have won. They couldn't pull it out. So they are here. They are the first time here. And then you have the Vikings, who have been there twice already. And they lost both times. And they're coming back for the third time, and hopefully third time was the charm for them to win it. For the Steelers, they were 10-3 and 1. They were sixth in offense and second in defense. They beat down Buffalo and Oakland to reach the Super Bowl. For the Minnesota Vikings, they were 10-4 with fifth in offense and third in defense, dominating the St. Louis Cardinals at the time, and they fought with the Rams to get back to the Super Bowl. This was definitely their shot once again to do it. Hall of Fame wise, it was loaded for the Minnesota Vikings. It was pretty much the same team, same Hall of Famers in terms of Page and Eller, Bud Grant and Tarkenton, Krause. For the Steelers, it would be Terry Bradshaw, Franco, Harris, Joe Green, Jack Ham, Jack Lambert, Lynn Swann, Mel Blount. List goes on and on. So for this Super Bowl, it was uh, it was definitely saddening for one franchise, and that was the Vikings. The Steelers would end up winning 16-6, and the Super Bowl MVP would go to Franco Harris. For the Steelers, this was their first championship. This was also the start of the name of the Steel Curtain. The era was born, and the impending doom of many football teams was going to be, unfortunately, met in the coming years. For the Vikings, this was their third Super Bowl loss, and this one hurt probably even worse. Just because three straight times, three straight chances, of trying to make it, trying to win finally, and it doesn't happen. So overall, this was another Super Bowl that was, you know, low scoring, and I couldn't tell you from watching it. I didn't watch the full game here, but Pittsburgh just looked dominant. Minnesota just looked lost, even though they were more experienced than Pittsburgh was. The last one on this video is going to be Super Bowl 10. Super Bowl 10 was played in Miami at the Orange Bowl. This was between the Dallas Cowboys and the Pittsburgh Steelers. And of course, Pittsburgh, just coming off their Super Bowl win, was looking for more. They still had the same Hall of Fame players. They still had the same stout defense. They still had the same Terry Bradshaw. For the Cowboys, they were looking to be back on top once again. They already tasted that feeling. They already had that feeling. They tasted victory before. They just wanted it again. So, in terms of the teams, Dallas was 10-4. They were eighth in offense. They were ninth in defense. So, still top 10. They had a fight with the Minnesota Vikings to get to the NFC Championship, and when they got to the NFC Championship, well, they destroyed the LA Rams. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, they were 12-2. They were fifth in offense, and they were second in defense. They dominated the Baltimore Colts, and they had a really frigid battle with the Oakland Raiders, which they won 16-10 to get to the Super Bowl. Hall of Fame wise, we can go all day with it. Pittsburgh had the same with the Jack Lamberts, the Mel Blunts, the Terry Bradshaws, the Len Swans, and the Dallas Cowboys as well had the same with Staubach and Bob Lilly and Randy White. But the main thing was this game definitely came down to the wire. The first one coming down to the wire in a while. But the Pittsburgh Steelers won 21-17 with Super Bowl MVP being Lynn Swann. This was the third team to go back to back. This was the beginning of a Dallas and Pittsburgh rivalry, and this was the start of what would be known, obviously, with the Steel Curtain and the Dallas Cowboys being named America's team.